to PTE Plus Online Classroom. Today, in the writing section of the PTE exam, we're going to be discussing what is the essay type question in the PTE examination. In particular, we're going to be discussing the different requirements within the rubric and marking criteria in order to achieve the highest possible mark in the essay type question. So to kick things off, let's have a look at the interface for those of you who haven't yet taken the exam. So the interface will look a bit like this. The first thing you should be noticing is that immediately on top you'll have your prompt. So you'll have the instructions and then you'll have a prompt. The prompt is going to be essentially talking about the sort of topic that the examination expects you to write about. And then at the bottom here you'll notice something more interesting. It says a total word count. And the word count is essentially counting however many words you've written. We expected for this particular question to write a minimum of at least 200 words and a maximum of no more than 300 words. So the word count at the bottom right will be helping you and assisting you in terms of keeping within those limits. The last thing that I want you to take notice of are the cut, copy, and paste buttons. These are just here at your convenience if you want to cut, copy, paste the different sort of sentences and words that you've written. So these are just here to help you and assist you and aren't really going to be that helpful in the grand scheme of things. So let's dive into the official PTE rubric. There are a total of 9 marks provided for each question. Let's look at how the 9 marks breaks down. So in terms of content, there are a total of 3 marks. So in order to get the full 3 marks, you need to adequately deal with the prompt. Now the key word here is adequately dealing with the prompt, whereas if we move down in terms of requirements, it gets less and less. Deals with the prompt but does not deal with one minor aspect. So here we're talking about the prompt in terms of breaking down into different aspects, and this is something that we're going to be exploring in the later lessons. You'll get only 1 mark if you deal with the prompt but omits a major aspect or more than one minor aspect, and finally 0 if you do not deal with the prompt at all. So from analyzing this rubric, we know that it's important for us to break the question down into different aspects and then also try to attempt to deal with each aspect of the question. But what are the other 6 marks about? Let's have a look. So 2 marks are allocated to form. Like we said earlier, the length should be between 200 to 300 words, so I think it's quite possible for everybody to get 2 for form. Moving down, you're allocated 1 mark if the length is between 120 and 199 words, or between 301 and 380 words. And obviously 0 if you're less than 120 and more than 360. So typically no one should be getting anything less than 2 here in this particular section, 2 or 1 if you're running out of time. And remember, here it also says that essay is written in capital letters, contains no punctuation. So a lot of students are confused when they see the capital letter part. Obviously you should be having capital letters, but only in the start of sentences for pronouns and names and like that. Obviously you're not putting in the whole paragraph in capital letters. That would be an example of where you'd get 0. Contains no punctuation or only consists of bullet points or very short sentences. So once again, make sure we do not use bullet points and we do use punctuation in order to get the marks allocated here towards form. In terms of development, structure, and coherence, 2 marks are allocated towards those who show good development and very logical structure. 1 mark is provided if it's incidentally less well structured and with some elements or paragraphs that are poorly linked. And obviously you get 0 if you lack coherence and mainly consist of lists or loose elements. So what does this mean? We're going to be discussing that later on. And finally we get to grammar. Now grammar is very important for us, and because it also doubles up in SWT, which is summarizing written text. You can see here that 2 marks are allocated if you show consistent grammar control of complex language. Errors are rare and difficult to spot. So obviously the last part's quite clear to us, right? We don't want a lot of errors. But what is complex language? And that's what we're going to be talking about in the following slide. You'll obviously get 1 mark if you show relatively high degree of grammar control, no mistakes which would lead to misunderstandings. So here you can see mistakes leading to misunderstandings represents big mistakes that would change the understanding and the way a sentence is interpreted. And you'll get 0 if you contain mainly simple structures or several basic mistakes. So what's all this about complex language and different structures? Let's have a look. Complex language is essentially a term or a jargon that's hard for a lot of people to understand, because what makes language complex isn't necessarily vocabulary as the name sort of would suggest. Complex language is hard words. No, complex language actually just deals with sentences. Essentially, what a complex language is defined by in English and in the PTE exam is the use of complex sentences. Now, there are lots of different types of complex sentences, and one type in particular we can look at is subordinate clauses. Subordinate clauses is an example of a terminology, once again, that's sort of making things hard for us to understand. Because first of all, we need to understand what subordinate means, and then we need to look at what clauses mean. So subordinate here means depending on another, whereas clauses mean a part of the sentence. So we all sort of use subordinate clauses in day-to-day life, and we hear it all the time as well, in the form of if, that, what. I'm going to the park if I want to exercise. So in that case, I want to go to the park is one clause, and if I want to exercise is obviously the other part of the clause. So let's look at some examples of different subordinate clauses. In the first sentence here, we have parents should be punished for the children's misbehavior. It's an example of a simple sentence because there's only one clause, right? Or there are two clauses, but the clauses don't link to each other. Parents should be punished if their children's behavior is destructive. It's an example of an adverbial clause. So here, if their children's behavior is destructive, is the adverbial clause. And then parents should be punished is the main clause. So one clause, two clause, and because the second clause relies on the first one, it's what we define as an adverbial clause. Number 3, parents should be punished for the behavior of their children who are still minors, attributive clause. Parents should be punished for what their children have done, object clause. So it's nice and easy to talk about this in terms of lists, but what does it look like in an actual written passage? Here, we've got a passage here. So one of the most common environmental issues is global warming, which causes many serious environmental problems. So can you try to guess what the clauses are, as well as what type of a subordinate clause this is? Excellent. Yep, you're right. It's an example of an attributive clause. Notice the first clause here. One of the most common environmental issues is global warming, which is fine to stand on its own. And then we have another clause, which causes many serious environmental problems. Notice how the second clause needs the first clause to exist. So if the first clause was just its own sentence, one of the most common environmental issues is global warming. It can exist on its own, right? And that makes sense. But if we have this sentence on its own, which causes many serious environmental problems, it doesn't make sense, right? Because wait, what's causing many serious environmental problems? So that's why this second clause is subordinate to the first. Let's look at the second sentence together. There are tough challenges associated with this issue, and its effects have very serious consequences. So here, once again, for the smart students, you would have broken it under two clauses. There are tough challenges associated with this issue, one clause, and its effects have very serious consequences. So, which one is a subordinate clause? I'll let you think about it. Exactly, there are none. They're both independent clauses that can stand on their own. So, this doesn't count as part of complex sentences, but rather it counts as a compound sentence. Compound sentences are an easier way to link simple sentences with words like but and while. However, using them too much is not suggested. So instead of using them too much, we would advise everyone to use a combination of simple sentences, complex sentences, and compound sentences. That way you can really show the PTE system that you have good control of the language and you have a good mastery of each different type of sentences. Now let's move on to development, structure, and coherence. You can see here the requirements can be essentially broken down into three aspects: logic, conjunctions, and related content. So let's talk about logic first. Here we have a question. Shopping malls are replacing small shops. It's a positive development. Notice how we've got all these different points. I'm going to give you a few seconds to read through them. You can pause the video here and read through them and think about which of these will give us logical points and which of these are less likely to give us logical points. So yep, better shopping experience, more products to choose from, convenient time saving. These are examples of positive developments related to the question. Like for example, these are telling us why shopping malls are replacing small shops in a positive manner. Whereas we can look at these 2 points: spending more time with friends and family, better lifestyle, and increased living standard. So these aren't as related to the direct question, and as a result, you might get marks deducted for these two particular types of answers. So remember, we always want to pick the dot points or the points that are going to be most relevant towards a question. So in this particular case, we've picked 5 different points that we want to talk about. Better shopping experience, more products to choose from, equipped with cafe, restaurants, car park air condition, and more time to relax. So these dot points, because they're more related towards shopping malls, they're going to get us a much better mark. And you might be wondering to yourself, well, how does the PTE system determine what's more related and what's not? So the PTE system obviously has a set of its own internal answers, and it's graded different sort of dot points into most relevant, least relevant, and not relevant at all. So in this particular section, we have to remember it is important to be creative, because we need to be creatively thinking about what we want to express, but don't go overboard, right? There's obviously a limitation to the creativity, and you need to apply your logic in determining whether or not the points you've generated are going to be relevant towards the question. So next, we're going to deal with conjunctions. So most of you are probably familiar with the term conjunctions, and you know that conjunctions mostly serve to essentially link sentences together. So in this example, we've got 2 ideas: better shopping experience and more products to choose from. You can say, this is a better shopping experience because there are more products to choose from. And in that particular case, we've linked our ideas together and we've showed the relationship between our ideas, and equipped with cafe, restaurants, etc. Right? It's another example of us linking our ideas together. But the key here is at the bottom. We've got the word therefore. Therefore, we've got more time to relax. And therefore serves not only as some sort of conclusion, but it also serves as a conjunction. So this is essentially the key to being able to have more coherence in our text. So if we were to split everything up, like shopping centers are better because it's a better shopping experience, shopping centers are better because there are more products to choose from, shopping centers are better because they're equipped with cafe, shopping centers are better because they have restaurants. That's an example of something that's not very coherent, right? And by using these sort of conjunctions, we're able to add coherence as well as just make our language seem a bit more fluent. Okay, now the last thing we want to talk about is the general linguistic range. This particular section of the exam, this particular section of what's being tested equals a total of 6 marks, which adds to the earlier 9 marks to give us a total of 15 marks per question. Now, in terms of how these 6 marks are broken down, we're offered 2 marks if we exhibit smooth mastery of a wide range of language to formulate thoughts precisely, give emphasis, differentiate, eliminate ambiguity, no sign that the test taker is restricted in what they want to communicate. Essentially what it wants is for you to be able to say whatever it is you want to say without, losing fluency, without seeming like you're preventing yourself from doing so. And you get 1 if you have a sufficient range of language to provide clear description, express viewpoints, and develop arguments. So what this means we're going to be showing you in the next slide. We've got vocabulary range. You'll get 2 marks if you show a good command of a broad lexical repertoire. Repertoire means how much words you've got in your brain. Idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms. Colloquialisms means day-to-day language, and idiomatic expressions are like, you know the drill. We've got the situation under wraps. So things like that. And obviously, moving down, you'll get 1 if you show a good range of vocabulary for matters connected to general academic topics. Lexical shortcomings lead to, obviously, less precision, and so you'll be losing marks. And you'll get 0 if you contain mainly basic vocabulary that's insufficient to deal with the point at the required level of the text. So spelling is quite obvious, right? So if you have correct spelling, you get 2 marks, and if you have 1 spelling error, that's 1, and you get more than 1 spelling error, that's 0 for spelling. So remember we said we'd talk about this earlier? In terms of general linguistic range, essentially what it's looking for is for you to be able to express the way you feel in different ways. Obviously, if we want to express the idea you're beautiful, that's very simple, right? It shows mainly basic language and lacks precision. So in being precise, we're saying you're more beautiful than anyone else in the world. That's an example of where we're showing emphasis. We're being able to not be restricted in what we want to communicate, and we show a wider mastery of the language. Another example is, you're the most beautiful girl that I've ever seen in my entire life. And in this case, both of these sentences show a much better mastery over the language, and they show our ability to express our thoughts precisely and give emphasis. So we're being very clear in what we think, right? You're the most beautiful girl, you're more beautiful than anyone else. So that's what we want to be aiming for in this section to get higher marks. So next, in terms of vocabulary range, so here we need to remember that there are very specific requirements for this particular category. It's not what we feel like is better vocabulary, but rather there are specific requirements for the computer for what is better vocabulary. So remember, the use of vocabulary that is highly rated by the machine and not personal feeling. And that's something we're going to be discussing in the later sessions. So how can we achieve 90 in writing? So we need to start off by gaining a better understanding of the machine-based marking system. It's only in understanding what the system wants us to do can we achieve a higher mark. Second, we need to prepare the vocabulary needed for various essay topics. So obviously in English and in sort of every language, there are specific vocabulary related to every single topic that we want. And there's, well, not that many general words you can use for everything. So this obviously is going to be more time consuming and take us longer to achieve. And finally, we want vocabulary and grammar error-free. What this means is we don't want to be making any mistakes in the vocabulary and grammar marks. Okay, so hopefully you've developed a better understanding today from today's session about what the question type is asking and what are the different requirements from the test. I hope to see you again very soon on the PTE Plus online lessons. Thank you for joining me today.